I live near Aragon, Georgia, on a big farm. And Era, my wife here now, come down to visit out of Dalton, Georgia. And I met her there around Aragon, Georgia at that time. We dated for about 5 or 6 months, got engaged to get married. She went back home, and I kind of lost track of her for a while. And back then, time was so poor, you couldn't travel much, had nowhere going. And I made up my mind, I'm gonna go see her. I caught a freight train out of Aragon, Georgia to go see her. I went into her home, spent the night with them, come back and caught a freight train back home, part of the way back home, back into Rome, Georgia. Got into Rome, just without a Rome, I was on a freight train going a whole way back home. They put me off the train. And I walked about 15 miles to get back home for visit my wife at that time.
I had flu almost, and Mama wouldn't let me get up out of the bed to go to the train to meet him. And my older sister and her husband took his picture, and I almost forgot.
Now, when did he propose? Did he do the old get on his knees? How did he do that?
No, I don't think he was that modern.
No.
Or old-fashioned, whichever. He just took it for granted, I believe. And he told her yes. And but I had talked my mother into letting me get up out of the bed and get dressed before they got back. And he come out in a taxi to the house out in the country, and it was long ways. And he didn't know how far it was. He didn't ask, and it was getting dark, and my dad asked him to spend the night and eat supper. And I didn't think my dad, he must have liked him, because he wouldn't have done that to nobody else. And so he had already asked me to marry him, and I didn't know if Daddy and Mother would approve of me marrying, but I was already nearly 21.
Come out of New York City, come into Atlanta, Georgia, and I got hooked on alcohol. Went into Dawson County looking for moonshine, and got in with my brother-in-law sister-in-law was in a church revival. I got converted and never did find my whiskey, and I lost my cigarettes.
It's 4th of July, and we went back up to Dawsonville and to visit my sister, and didn't know they were in revival. And this old fella with a long beard went back to the back seat and said, "Young man, don't you think you ought to go to the altar?" And he said he was wanting to go. He was holding the bench to keep him going. And when he asked him, he ran to the altar and slid with his feet under the altar. And they come, and my brother-in-law was a pastor, and he walked back and asked me to go pray with him. But when I went up there, I found myself praying for myself. And that's when I got the Holy Ghost. And somebody come to their door the next morning and knocked on the door, and my daughter was about 7 years old, I guess, and she went to the door and said, "Come in. Daddy got saved last night, and Mama got crucified." and I laughed at that. But when he got saved, he got his hat off, and the house was full, and the church house was, and he got his hat off and went out in the crowd, not asking anybody, and took up offering for the 2 preachers that was running the revival. They were evangelists. And that's the first thing he done after he got saved. Took off.
And I came back to Atlanta working for General Motors. And they told me everything will be joy, peace, and happiness. When I got saved and come back on my job, all hell broke loose. They gave me a hard time. They persecuted me day in and day out for what I believe, what I turned to believe. And matter of fact, it got so rough for me, they put a program on for me. 2 men put on a healing service for me. I come back up, and there was the people standing in a rainbow circle. I looked around, they hollered Puckett, and one man laid a hand on him with planks under his arms. He jumped up and down like he got healed and dropped his planks. Another man laid hands on him. Both of these men got in serious trouble from a mock of God. You better be careful how you mock the Lord. These 2 men that I was telling you about, they put on that program, that was on a Friday at noontime. And matter of fact, on a Monday morning, he got up to go to work, started the bathroom. He died before he got to the bathroom. And the other man that laid hands on him, he was in the hospital for over a year and never did work no more. And from there, I went to Jonesboro, Georgia, and built a church while I was there. And matter of fact, back in those days, holiness wasn't very much thought of. And my state overseer was in the city at the time. They told me to get out of town. And it went on like that. And I asked the overseer about me going there. I felt my call into the ministry. He said, "Brother Puckett, no need you going. I done shook the dust off my feet against that town. There's nothing there." So I went on anyhow. Went organized a church. And God really blessed, I'll tell you. A number of people joined the church, got a good church going. And God still, and they got a beautiful church there now.